Hi, my name is Emily Rosmus. I'm the Education Coordinator.
And my name is Hunter Kauffman. I'm the Nature and Arts Educator here at the NED Smith Center. At the center, we are all about fostering an appreciation for both nature and the arts. And I can think of no better way to merge the two than with the popular pastime of nature photography.
Nature photography is a very broad genre which can cover wildlife photography, landscape, and macro photography. Today we're going to look at some tips to help you out with all three of those.
Welcome to NED Talks. Now, before we dive into nature photography, we are just going to quickly cover how to properly hold your camera. And this can be for anything from a cell phone camera up to a DSLR like I have here. And the first thing is going to be holding your camera with two hands. We're not going to be doing any of that one-handed shooting that does make for inherently shaky pictures. So again, two hands. And if you're using a DSLR like this, you're going to have one hand on the grip where the trigger is and the other hand on the lens to help stabilize that lens, and that's also what you're zooming in and out with anyways. If you're using a cell phone, that just means gripping both sides of the cell phone to keep it steady. When we are shooting, we're not going to hold the camera out away from our bodies like this because, again, shaky picture. So instead, it's going to help to pull your arms into your body and keep them tight against your body to help stabilize that camera. The third thing is if you have a strap like this on the camera, you are going to want to wear that strap because this is an expensive piece of equipment and that strap is there to help prevent any drops or falls. And then fourth, in nature photography, we're often taking pictures of things that are far away or moving, so it's really helpful to stabilize that camera by leaning up against a tree. Using some sort of rest or a tripod is very helpful here too.
When talking about nature photography, it's also important that we talk a little bit of ethics. So you always want to make sure you're aware of your surroundings, the environment that you're entering into, as well as the wildlife itself. So you might see a few butterflies flittering around behind me on these flowers. It wouldn't be wise to catch one of those butterflies and take it inside to photograph. Not only is it going to be very stressful for that organism, they might not survive their trip inside, but also it's much more interesting to photograph wildlife in their natural habitat, for example, on some of this bee balm behind me, than it is to photograph it inside in an artificial habitat. You also want to be aware of where you're stepping when you're going into that environment or that habitat that you're looking at. So for example, we have a beautiful spice bush swallowtail behind me. I don't want to start trampling over these flowers because the butterflies probably aren't going to stay in the area and you're doing detrimental harm to that habitat. You want the butterflies to continue to come back to this area. You don't want to trample their habitat.
So now we'll leave you with some quick tips to help to get you started with nature photography. So as we mentioned, nature photography encompasses a couple different genres of photography, including landscape photography, wildlife photography, and macro photography. I'd have to say these are the three most popular categories. So we have some tips for each. For landscape photography, if you are going out and trying to capture a landscape, try and think about a unique way you can frame that landscape. So what features of that landscape make it different than other similar landscapes? So when you're framing a shot of a landscape, you want to try and include those features or frame your shot in a unique way that kind of defines the features that make that area unique. For wildlife photography, it's also important, as Emily mentioned, to frame that subject in its habitat. So again, we don't want to be taking butterflies off of those flowers and to somewhere unnatural to photograph them, but we also want to try and capture that butterfly's natural behavior. So what would make a very good photo of that butterfly is when that butterfly is performing a behavior it would normally perform, such as pollinating a flower or landing on flowers. The same goes for deer or other wildlife you're trying to photograph. So if you're taking a picture of a bald eagle, you might want to try and get a photo of a bald eagle diving and catching a fish or performing some other natural behavior. For macro photography, you're taking pictures of very close-up objects. So a tip for you there is to really focus on where your focus point is in your photo, especially because you're taking pictures of very small things. Often you have a lower depth of field than you normally would. So if you're taking a picture of a person just standing there for a portrait, you can focus anywhere on that person pretty much and it will work for you. But if you're taking a picture of something very small like a butterfly, you're probably going to want to focus right on that butterfly's eye or face or somewhere there in order for that picture to be properly in focus.
The first rule of photography is to isolate the subject. You want the viewer to be immediately aware of what the subject of the photograph is. You can use a variety of techniques post-processing to achieve this, but when shooting the photo, you can ensure there aren't objects competing for attention in your shot or anything that looks more interesting than your main goal. Zoom in, find a different angle, or change up the aperture to blur the background. The second rule is leading in or using leading lines. Leading lines help to guide the viewer's eye and establish the subject. Lines that do not lay well or a subject that is facing out of frame can cause the viewers to question what the subject is looking at or where that line is going and why can't they see it. The third and last rule we'll talk about is the rule of thirds. Divide your photo into 3 vertical and 3 horizontal quadrants. Photos that are more pleasing to look at typically have their subjects placed along these axes or at their intersections. You also want to avoid placing the subject in the dead center of the frame, as this can just look awkward.
In all, nature photography can be a really fun pastime, and once you start picking up on the rules and tips and tricks, you can branch out, get more complex, more creative, and as Emily mentioned, even start breaking some of the rules of photography in unique ways. But until then, we hope that these tips and tricks are able to be helpful to you.
We'd love to see some of your photography, so if you'd like, share it on our social media platforms at NED Smith Center or #NEDSmithCenter. We'll see you on our next NED Talk.
And happy snapping.